Thank you. Oh, should I go now? Yeah. Hello, everybody. Well, thank you for being with us. My name is Peter Prengeman. My friend and colleague here is Mauricio Savarese. And we are going to talk today about our book, Dilma's Downfall. Now, this book was published in September, and it explores the 2016 impeachment in Brazil of Brazil's first female president, Dilma Rousseff. She was impeached for, on its face, mismanaging the federal budget. But as we're going to talk a little bit about today, it was much more complicated than that, right? There was betrayal. There was brutal politics. If anybody out there has watched House of Cards, this is House of Cards, kind of Brazilian style, right, Mauricio?
Redux.
Yeah. Misogyny, all kinds of things that come into play. So thank you for being with us, Mauricio. Anything else before we get into it?
Well, it's nice at least to have a chance to talk to you about that because we've written so long and we've discussed this over a lot of time, and now to see the finished result is really nice. And to think how this book might have been perceived differently if we had put it out in 2017, 2018, 2019, and now in 2021 when Brazil is governed by a far right president, it's a very different perception. I think we during our time stuck with the reporting, which was the key for our project. But the perception of what we're reporting was bringing would be surely different over the years because, well, no one could anticipate Bolsonaro presidency in 2016. And now we've not only seen Bolsonaro be elected, but we've seen the effects of his government and what that is doing to Dilma's legacy as well, because, of course, she is being read again under a different light.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Sometimes you understand better things when you look back at them. You know, as they say, hindsight is 2020. And I think one thing that we've seen in the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro is how much impeachment, and not just impeachment, but certainly impeachment and several other things paved the way for him to become president in a country that had leftist presidents and governments for many years before, and really it was hard to imagine somebody like Bolsonaro, I think, being in charge of Brazil.
Yeah, and in one of the interviews we had with Dilma, it was in 2017. I mean, people were already talking about a Bolsonaro candidacy, and I remember when she said, "I don't think Brazil is going down that path. It's too radical for Brazil. We're not going there. We're going somewhere else." And then she talked about politicians that she felt had betrayed her, and politicians that she thought were not really reliable. She even talked a little about Bolsonaro's vote, but never with the impression that he could actually win the presidency. And of course, she has had to take the president under a very different light now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I want to do here, and I think this will be pretty cool, is to read a little bit from our first chapter. And this first chapter, for people out there, is "The Stage is Set," and that's Dilma riding a bicycle, which you'll find is kind of an important theme for her. So I'm going to read a passage, and then Mauricio, I'm going to ask you to kind of weigh in, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Will do.
Chapter 1, "The Stage is Set." On the day that would mark the beginning and the end of her presidency, Brazilian President Dilma Vana Rousseff got up at 5:30 a.m. and prepared to go cycling. While she pedaled through the capital of Brasilia, passing large modernist buildings and flanked by security, she reflected on a dream she had had recently. Instead of feeling the heat from lawmakers, as she had since the beginning of her second term, in the dream, the president was applauded in Congress. For an instant, she was happy, despite more than a year of fighting that had gotten her and the country to this point. But that was not reality. Later that day, Wednesday, December 2nd, 2015, impeachment proceedings were launched against Rousseff. She believed it would get sorted out, said Carlos Araujo, her ex-husband and close friend. She was ready to fight. So as we get into this, Mauricio, tell me a little bit about Araujo, Carlos Araujo, and about you going there, you sitting down with him, and why this is important to start the story this way.
Well, Araujo was her closest confidant, and they were married for about 30 years. They divorced and still remained very close friends. The apartment where Rousseff lives today is just a few meters away from his house, like from the house they lived in for a lot of time. And Araujo was also her best political analyst in many ways, because he could give her his honest opinion about things without fear of retribution, which was what a lot of Dilma associates used to say about her boss, that she was too brutal sometimes when she heard opinions that she didn't like. But that was never the case with Carlos Araujo, who was a guerrilla man just like her in the late 60s. They were arrested for a very long time. They were both tortured. Dilma got married to Araujo in jail, technically, so she could visit him. She was already out of prison, and Araujo was not. So they found a way to organize a sort of a wedding that was not really presidential. I mean, she just signed the term. He also signed his term, and then they got married. And their friendship also shows a bit of how Dilma thinks of politics, and I think that's scattered through the book in different ways. She thinks of government like a communist guerrilla cell. I mean, a very small group of people in which she trusts, and a lot of people who are associating for different reasons, who are somehow helping her out in some tasks or helping her out in some assignments, but are not the people who she's going to speak her mind very often. And Araujo passed not very long after our two interviews with him. He gave us some tips on how to get closer to Dilma too. I mean, he talked about the banana cake she liked from a bakery shop that was really close. He talked about the Arab food restaurant that she used to call to order food herself, and I brought that up in a couple of interviews as in a way to say, "Wow, we're really paying attention and trying to decipher you." We gave him the cake too, and he couldn't eat it because he had developed diabetes as well. So he said, "I'm going to save it for her for the next weekend," because there was a Friday and they were expected to have lunch together. We didn't talk to Dilma in the first time I approached Carlos and in Porto Alegre, and he's a very interesting character that many people thought would be a much more important political figure than his wife, but it actually happened the other way around. And we'll never know for sure whether he felt somewhat, I don't know, disappointed for that, because he was never mayor, governor, minister, government minister, anything like that. And Dilma became president without any expectation that she would ever achieve so high.
Yeah, no, and I think for us in the storytelling realm, I mean, he was a really important person because he gave you in the interviews with him insight into her thinking, even the day of the impeachment being submitted. Let me continue here a little bit. So here we go. Brazil's first woman president strongly believed that reason would come to enemy politicians and businessmen, and that despite frustration over her handling of the economy, they would eventually back down. If that didn't happen, Rousseff and supporters boasted the Supreme Federal Tribunal, the country's highest court, would block any impeachment effort. After all, they said her adversaries did not really have a case against her, and we'll get more into this. Fiscal maneuvering was her supposed offense. Former presidents had done the same kind of budget moves she was accused of and faced no consequences. Rousseff was not facing allegations of corruption for personal gain, nor had she ever been. And she believed that growing street protests against her would subside by the end of December, when the Southern Hemisphere's summer begins and many Brazilians take vacations and spend time on the beach. That kind of a slow fade was what happened to big demonstrations in 2013, the year before Brazil hosted the World Cup. And in August 2016, Rio de Janeiro would host the Olympic Games, which she and her mentor, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, had secured for the country in 2009, beating out US President Barack Obama's Chicago and Tokyo and Madrid. Although a tall order, Rousseff's inner circle figured the best solution was to put Brazil's economy on the path to quick recovery. If that and other fail-safe measures failed, surely she would find another way to defend herself and stay in office until her term ended at the end of 2018. And then the thinking of the Workers' Party supporters went, the likable and progressive Lula would get the presidential sash back, thus blocking politicians who were becoming increasingly popular with hard right positions, such as Congressman Jair Bolsonaro. So, I think what's important here is Dilma knows her job is on the line, right? But she's not really worried about it because there are all these steps along the way that, in theory, could save her. What do you think?
I remember we were both reporting about that in January 2016. Eurasia, this very respected consultancy firm, they said the chances for impeachment to actually be approved were 30%, which was higher than the previous month when it was like 10%. But it showed, she had a lot of things to work with to stay in office. And I don't know if it is true indeed that she didn't care, but she gave the appearance of not caring. And a lot of lawmakers thought that was looking like, well, she's a bit aloof because she's not really seeing the danger coming at her. And that was also a bit of what her allies said then. She downplayed the risks. She didn't take Cunha seriously enough when he was elected speaker the year before. Eduardo Cunha, the Speaker of the House, basically got the efforts to impeach her. And she was never really, she trusted her position so much that she thought she had almost, though democratic in her ways and thinking, that she had a sort of an imperial way of, well, I'm the president. There's not going to be a lawmaker that is going to throw me out. And in the end, her perception proved wrong.
Yeah. Not to hold it, biking against her, right? Exercise is good. It's not a bad thing for all of us to get some exercise, even on a day that you're going to be dealing with, impeachment legislation against you. However, you could also argue, man, if your job is on the line, you should be talking to people, right? Don't go biking today or this week. You need to be in lawmakers' offices trying to figure out how you can solve this. So the personality piece of it is important, and we'll get to that a little bit more. Let me read this passage of where she comes from, because I think this is really important, right? We put this in the first chapter for a reason. So here's where she is. So, born in 1947 in Belo Horizonte, the capital of the central eastern state of Minas Gerais, which borders Rio de Janeiro state, Rousseff grew up in a middle-class home. Her father, Petar Rousseff, who would later change his name to Pedro Rousseff, was a Bulgarian immigrant who had arrived in Brazil in 1945. When he was 46, Pedro married Dilma Jane Coimbra da Silva, a teacher 26 years his junior. Dilminha, or young Dilma, was the second of the couple's three children. Early on, Rousseff showed an interest in reading and ballet, and she would attend operas with her disciplined, austere, and proud father, who friends and allies say was the most important figure in her life. She wore glasses from the time she was 12, but they didn't keep her from being a physically active kid. She and neighborhood friends would play on the top of stone walls that separated houses, and her love of cycling started early. When she was 7 years old, her father bought her a yellow bicycle with an image of Mickey Mouse attached to the handlebars. While Rousseff grew up comfortably, she was also keenly aware of the poverty around her. The year she was born, Belo Horizonte celebrated 50 years since its founding. Driven by mining and agriculture, the economy of the fledgling city flourished, and the population increased rapidly to more than 300,000. As is often the case in Brazil, however, development was uneven. Rapid industrialization brought poor people from rural areas faster than the infrastructure could be built to receive them. People would sometimes knock on the door of Rousseff's family home to ask for work, money, or food. One day, when a poor boy came to the door, a young Rousseff ripped a bill of cruceros, which was the currency at the time, in hopes of sharing it with the child. So she rips this bill and gives part of it to him. That drew a rebuke from her mother, but an affectionate, lighthearted response from her father. And her father would die, actually, when she was 15, and he was 62. He would die of a heart attack. So, tell us a little more. Paint us a picture of who this person is, right? She she's rich. She comes from an affluent family.
She does, and Rousseff is actually a way to make Rousseff sound a little more French, which was what her father really intended when he came to Brazil, and look a little more upscale. And uh, Dilma knows how to speak French. She speaks some English, understands Spanish, so it isn't a frequent thing for Brazilians to have even a grasp of English, and much less of French. Even presidents, I mean, few of them recently do do have French skills among their main skills, and she's really proud of that. She has grown in Minas Gerais in an affluent family, but she also lost everything because of the guerrilla. So she knows a bit of what it is like to have a lot of money and make her way into the Minas Gerais society with nice parties and trips and things that most Brazilians could not afford. But when she goes into the guerrilla, she didn't really have, well, she didn't have her name. She was using the code name Vanda, if I'm not mistaken, for a very long time. And I think that the guerrilla experience also makes her a very different person, because she understood what it is like not to have the basics for the day, even if that meant fighting for the country. I don't know if I'm being totally clear about that, because she's a fuzzy character for a lot of folks, even for those who have written about her, and she gives us very little perception of what she's really like. We just have glimpses here and there, but she's a bit like the president that could have been one of the presidents of the 20s, 30s, and 40s if she were a man. And I don't know if that's a good comment to make, but I think
No, no, I think what you say there.
we can edit this later, but I don't think that worked well.
Yeah, no, no, it's fine. No, seriously, it's fine. I mean, I think there are two points for me in what you said, and in this passage is like, okay, first she's rich, she's affluent, but we see like in the kid coming to the door and her trying to give him money, like she's aware of the poverty around her, right? I mean, she's there are rich people who are just don't even look, don't care. And there are, of course, rich people who do see and do care. And I think, clearly she did at some level, even as a kid. And I think that in a small way, at least probably influenced her politics. Right. And we're going to talk a little bit about how she grew up, as a teenager. But then the second thing is of like being a guerrilla and, being part of armed struggle, even if she wasn't like taking up arms herself. And we'll talk about that too. But also in getting jailed because of that and losing everything, like I think your point is really clear. Like she had this really important perspective, right? She has everything. She knows what that feels like. She also knows what it feels like to be in prison and to be tortured.
Yeah.
Let me
she,
just read
she
a
had
passage.
she had to live for 3 years in solitary, and I mean, there's nothing bigger in privation in a jail if you are just isolated by yourself and don't see anyone for years, just like Pepe Mujica in Uruguay and other Latin American leaders as well. So she has that experience, plus the torture, which adds to it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, here's the next part of this is actually what's going on in the country, when she's growing up. So, in 1960, Jânio da Silva Quadros, a populist former governor of São Paulo state, won the presidency on promises to sweep the country of corruption. It's like a constant theme in Brazil, the corruption. His campaign symbol was a broom. But without a majority in Congress, combined with an eccentric personality that made governing difficult, Quadros resigned 7 months into the job. Many historians believe that Quadros calculated that thousands of people would rise up and insist he return, giving him more leverage over Congress and the military. That never happened. Coming from a family of landowners, João Goulart, who had been elected to the vice presidency in parallel with Quadros, at the time Brazilians could vote for different tickets on president and vice president, took over after a compromise was reached in Congress. For many federal lawmakers, Goulart from the Brazilian Labor Party was too far to the left. It didn't help that he was on a trade mission to communist China when Quadros resigned. After governing for 2 years alongside an appointed prime minister, per the agreement, in 1963, Goulart won a referendum that gave him full presidential powers. His administration moved further left, building ties with center-left political parties in simpatico foreign countries and initiating ambitious reforms around education, the tax code, voting rights, and land redistribution, all the while clashing with leaders of more conservative currents in the country. On April 1st, 1964, when Rousseff was 16 years old, Goulart left the capital, Brasilia, for Porto Alegre hours after rebel troops started moving to topple him. Brazil's Senate president declared the presidency vacant in a session that started at 2:40 a.m. the following day, as most of the country slept. There was almost no resistance, including from Goulart, who went into exile in Uruguay. A provisional president was sworn in, only to be replaced soon after by Marshal Humberto Castelo Branco, the first dictator of the new regime. So this is in the backdrop of Rousseff when she is a teenager, right, or coming. And so, in your mind and from the research we did, how does this shape her?
I'll try to be brief because I think we only have 2 minutes in our recording. But she comes from a generation that thinks that Brazil only rose back from the military dictatorship because of their personal courage in taking up arms and fighting the regime and bringing headlines abroad that would talk about death and torture in Brazil. She comes from a part of that generation that believed that just writing and speaking, that didn't really bring change, and that Brazil could live a much longer dictatorship if that was the case. And when Brazil goes back into democracy, it is a very slow process too, because the first president was civilian. She was not elected by the people. He was elected by Congress, and that gave the regime some time to adapt and to forgive itself for the crimes it had committed. And Rousseff has never forgotten that. And when she becomes president, she installs the Commission of Truth, which was not supposed to punish people from those days that were in the military and using Brazil's government to attack civilians and torture civilians. But she wanted a Commission of Truth to discuss what really happened. And of course, that displeased the army. It has also sparked some of the pro-Bolsonaro feelings that we have seen since, and that have made an army that was very not much of a friend of Bolsonaro's, because they saw him as a sort of a union leader, becoming this key figure for Brazil now. And much of that comes from Rousseff's persistence and in believing that Brazil's democracy should be better as long as it addressed the crimes that had been committed during the military regime. And she did that in her presidency. I think we have 20 seconds.
Well, no, I think that's a good part to end. I thank everybody for being with us. As we just talked about the first chapter, it gives you a sense of Rousseff, who she is, and I think prepares us for the fight to come in impeachment. So join us again for the next one. And good to see you, Mauricio.
Good to see you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.